Hey guys. So I was up late last night combing through some of the stuff that came out, and then some of it came out really late towards the end of the stream. So I figured I would go over that in a little more detail this morning. This won't be a long one. I have to start work by like 9:15, 9:30. So yesterday was the deadline for sealing requests for the parties, and then all the non-parties, third parties who want things to remain sealed, exhibits and things that have been put out there attached to the motions for summary judgment and a couple other things. So the parties, the Wayfarer parties, the Lively parties, or I guess would just be Blake and Stephanie Jones. They didn't actually attach copies of their proposed redactions like a lot of the non-parties did. So, well, not a lot of the non-parties, I guess, but some of the non-parties. So we had the Wallace non-parties and the like former tag employees, maybe one of them was a current tag employee, attach the documents so the public could see like what the documents were and see most of them, but it had some proposed redactions. Like we want to keep these redactions on there. So the Lively parties, the Wayfarer parties will have a chance to say, no, we don't want these things to remain redacted if they want to do that. And here's why. We also had Isabella Ferrer, who yesterday asked that certain parts of her deposition transcript remain sealed. So we had a lot of that going on. We have WME, we had Sony, some of Blake's businesses, I believe. But some of the more interesting stuff came with Sony, with WME, and with Blake's letter motion to seal. Let me pull this up first, because this was kind of like comical, I felt like. So we know this whole issue was she wanted an extension for, request for continued sealing. So it got pushed all the way to now. They have that oral argument hearing for the motions for summary judgment and for the spoliation sanctions on January 22nd. The judge would like to resolve this before then. That is going to be a public hearing. So this this is the first thing I saw from them last night was Blake asking to seal, important parts of the filing to continue sealing. So these documents that she has attached, she wants to keep them all completely sealed. Even like with the proposed redactions on there, she doesn't want anyone to see those yet, which is like, okay, she could have filed those to where the public could see right now the documents with the proposed redactions, kind of like Brianna, Coslow and Katie Case did, or like the Wallace parties did, but they opted not to do that. But then again, as well, I'm realizing is like Stephanie Jones did the same thing. And then I also didn't see the Wayfarer parties attach their documents with the proposed redactions either. So I don't know what went on there or if they came to some sort of agreement. But I did just think this was kind of funny that this whole thing is like wanting to keep things sealed. And she's like, but let me seal, let me seal some of this stuff, please, while I'm asking for it. We'll go through parts of her letter really quick. Since I did skim over these with Cassidy last night, we don't have to read them word for word, which helps so that I'm not boring you guys to death with more of my reading. Give me one sec. So here's a copy of her letter where she's asking to continue sealing certain things and why. It says, Ms. Lively respectfully requests the materials remain under seal because they implicate third parties' privacy interests and or contain non-disclosed financial and commercial information. Right? And they're talking about privacy interests of third parties. A lot of these letters are going to have the same kind of language because that's the standard that they're supposed to, argue to keep these things sealed under, right? So we're going to see the same language in a lot of these letters. So I'm not going to read through that really too much. Let's see. Ms. Lively's narrowly tailored requests seek to seal limited confidential communications strictly between third parties. Limited communications with or about third parties who lack any substantial connection to It Ends With Us and or this litigation. So you're probably going to see, I assume the Wayfarer parties will probably argue some of that and say, no, these messages about third parties do have substantial connection to It Ends With Us. We know that the judge, said that he denied Blake a protective order for the Taylor Swift text, so they did have to turn those over. I'm assuming that has a lot to do with it. I find it kind of hypocritical and interesting that the lady who improperly obtained Jennifer Abel's phone contents and text messages and then blasted them to the world through a newspaper like the New York Times, is this concerned that the public should not see her text messages that talk about third parties or talking to third parties. I find that, again, like I said, kind of hypocritical. Whether or not that is proper from a legal standpoint, whether or not she can get away with that is a different issue. I'm just saying from a personal opinion standpoint, I find that wildly hypocritical and almost comical. So give me one sec to get a sip of water here, guys. Okay. We haven't seen any filing from Colleen Hoover or the Leather Pants Jenny. Leather Pants Jenny. Don't make Leather Pants Jenny a thing, damn it. Okay. I can't deal with that name. But no, Jenny Slate and Colleen Hoover, yes, you're correct. I didn't see anything from them. But, you know, anything relating to them that the Lively parties filed, they may have kept or are arguing to keep those redactions as it stands. So I don't know if that would be necessary. I don't know. Or there's also just the possibility that they saw what was put out there, or they were informed of what was put out there, and they were like, fine, whatever, you know? Because you don't have to object to this stuff. You don't have to say, I want to keep this stuff sealed. But you could, as long as you did it by 11:59 p.m. last night. So, correct. There was nothing from Taylor Swift either. So, all right. First of the 940 exhibits subject to the parties' pending motions, Ms. Lively requests only that 8 communications between third parties remain under seal in their entirety, and that 3 third-party communications be unsealed, except for Ms. Lively's proposed limited redactions. Okay. Private communications between third-party Ryan Reynolds and his talent agents are appropriately subject to sealing or to protect third-party privacy interests. Mr. Reynolds was named as a defendant, and the Wayfarer defendants now dismiss litigation, but he is neither a party to this litigation, nor has he substantially participated in it. Which, like, his name might not be on stuff, and he's not listed as a party anymore, but it's very hard to believe from, like, a practical standpoint. Like I said, this is not, like, a legal thing, right? It's just a personal opinion. So, just as an observer, I find it very hard to believe that he hasn't substantially participated in this mess. So it is what it is. How that will play out as far as the judge goes and the court goes with redacting, I have no idea. Indeed, the Wayfarer defendants did not even depose Mr. Reynolds in this litigation, even though he offered to make himself available. Well, are you upset about that? I mean, are you upset about that? He did not ask to be involved in this lawsuit. I see. So he did not ask to be involved in this lawsuit. This is another kind of quote, this kind of language we're going to see a lot there that's cited. It was also in Isabella's. I didn't closely read some of the others enough, like the business ones, to know if they included the same thing, but did not ask to be involved in this lawsuit is something you're going to see a lot. Okay. The communication should be sealed in their entirety. Okay. Certain communications between crew members also implicate third-party privacy interests, and Ms. Lively requests continued partial sealing on that basis. Now, if the communication between crew members is like them talking to each other, I kind of get that, right? The crew members talking to each other, the crew members who did not ask to be dragged into this, say she like subpoenaed the crew members' communications, and then she included those in exhibits in her response to the motion for summary judgment. I understand protecting the crew members who like certainly didn't ask for her to force them to turn over their communications. I understand why that stuff would be kept private. So like, I try to step back and look at the bigger picture here and be like, okay, but this sentence right here isn't about Blake or Ryan. It's about crew members. And I agree that they should be protected. Provided that the information that they, supplied that is supposed to be redacted, doesn't actually have anything to do with the lawsuit to the extent that the judge would consider this stuff when deciding on summary judgment, that kind of thing. But when they say certain communications, it's like you can, like we saw last night when the text messages from the tag employees came out, because we went through a lot of that last night. Like you can include the text messages and then just redact some of the text messages. You don't have to redact all of them. So that's kind of where I get tripped up, especially with Isabella's request. I'm like, you're asking for your, testimony about intimate scenes to be, sealed continuously. But is it the whole thing, or are you asking for just certain portions? If you're asking for the whole thing, I think that's a little bit more of a hard, thing to argue, because the intimate scenes were obviously so relevant to this litigation. But if it's like a couple lines about, a tattoo on someone's butt, I don't really think that's something that the public needs to know. So that's a ridiculous example and probably not something that ever would have come up in that deposition. But I'm just trying to demonstrate my line of thinking here, because I feel like it is a little bit complicated. Tom Stanfield 84, thank you for the £2. I think it's pound. Is that sterling or pounds? I can't remember now. Hi, lovely Lauren. You're dedicated and your awesomeness. Well, thank you very much, man. Thanks for the 2. All right. So let's move through this, and then we'll get to the Sony stuff. Ms. Lively seeks to shield from disclosure the names and identifying information of third parties with or about whom she has communicated, who have not been subject to discovery of this action, have little to no connection to the film, and or may lack any substantial involvement in the litigation. Okay. So shield from disclosure the names and identifying information of third parties with or about whom she's communicated. Okay. So in the text messages that were released last night from the tag employees, you can kind of see the same thing there, right? Like, so the numbers are all blacked out, rightfully so. But then sometimes the name of the person who's sending the message is also blacked out. And I think that is, to some extent can be appropriate as long as it's not abused. You know what I mean? So, and I find myself a little skeptical when it comes to these people, but that is just a personal feeling. So I don't know what else to say about that. Okay. Release of the information subject to Ms. Lively's limited redactions may increase the risk of exposure, and in the case of at least one third party, continued exposure to harassment in the press and or social media, and poses security, safety, and privacy risks. So where the sealing is actually appropriate and can prevent unnecessary harassment based on details that aren't relevant to It Ends With Us or the people involved in the lawsuit, I agree with that. But again, these people are known to be very creative with their redacting in a way that kind of, in my opinion, abuses the process. I was kind of subject to, how they use that improperly or take advantage of redactions improperly to use as a tool or a weapon. Like, I was exposed to that firsthand, as well as many other people who she subpoenaed through Google or various social media sites. And they used redactions at one point to try to suggest that we were all listed on some, list of people who had been in communications with one of the publicists agencies, which we come to find out only one person was on that list. And it was somebody who was, doing a documentary, who was not just, let's put it this way. It didn't represent everyone, on the 107 list. There was one person on it, and they suggested that it was all of us, but it was not. So when it comes to these people and their redactions, I have a hard time believing or taking what they're saying at face value. I'm having a hard time collecting my thoughts first thing in the morning, but hopefully that made sense. But as we know, Andy was the only one of the social media subpoena people who was actually on that list. So, and we all know Andy's still, doing this stuff in court. So, all right. Give me one sec here, guys. I don't see why they can't redact the names and context clues pointing to who it may be, but not what was said. They can do that. And we've seen them do that even in the stuff that came out last night. So yeah, that can work out that way. So yeah, it should be like narrowly tailored like that, I think. All right. That is my opinion, not, the legal standard, but okay. Third, Ms. Lively seeks partial sealing of deposition testimony referencing a third party's medical information. So last night when we read that, I thought back to like Jed Wallace and how she, knew that she was supposed to, he had approval to keep sealed his medical information and like his medical condition. And then when they had their, ongoing thing in Texas at the same time, she then went to the court in Texas and like outed that information outside of the New York court, which was just interesting. I was like, so now suddenly we care about medical information, but I understand that needing to be redacted because it's like the answer to her being hypocritical with that is not necessarily an eye for an eye. You know what I mean? It's, in my opinion, should be people cracking down on her or people doing stuff like that where they work around the system to expose someone's medical information rather than, well, this person's medical information was exposed, so let's expose someone else's, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, there's not much more to this. Let's get over to the Sony one and the WME one. So Sony and WME are both very much out for Sony and WME. So in this letter, they're going to talk about how Blake took things out of context and that they have an issue with that. But then you can also see there's so much that's happened thus far that they didn't have any problem, being taken out of context. So I'm kind of like, right now, what's clear to me is that these businesses are obviously, they're going to do what's best for their businesses. So I do take these things with a grain of salt. So like Sony complains that Blake took stuff out of context, but then they go a step further, and they absolutely like roast her in this, which is interesting. But then we also have WME who's talking about, Jamie and Justin taking things in a way that they don't appreciate. So these businesses, I guess, ultimately at the end of the day, it's like they're out for their business interests. But let's get to the interesting part of this letter. Okay. So SPE is Sony Pictures Entertainment, has carefully evaluated the sealed documents and requests the court seal a very modest amount of SPE material filed in connection with the aforementioned filings. Okay, so they want narrowly tailored portions of deposition testimony, text, and emails of their employees, highly sensitive terms of a commercial agreement, and personal phone numbers of SPE employees. Let's see. So these lists are they're talking about, my bad, it's my phone alarm. What the document is in the attachment and why, like what the basis for sealing is. I'm not going to go through all of this stuff. It's like the same kind of language you can see on each one, and it's a really long table. I don't think I really need to go through all that right now. Let's see. Okay. Give me 1 second here, guys. All right. So like I said, the language used is going to be the same in a lot of these letters, so I'm not going to read through it word for word too much like that. None of the SPE material, a narrowly tailored subset of SPE produced information designated AEO under the protective order, is relevant to the performance of the court's judicial function. That makes sense. All right. So here again, they're going through each document exhibit and saying like why it should be sealed. So I'm not going to read all of these. Okay. And so some of this stuff is like not even contested. It says Wayfarer parties consent to the sealing of this document and SPE understand. They will also be moving to seal the document. I mean, I guess Lively could argue with that, but I don't know if she would. Any oppositions to this stuff are due by end of next Monday. So it's okay. So here was the one I wanted to go through with you guys because this was the one that was a little bit interesting. Exhibit 96 this is Blake's counter rule 56.1 statement. Exhibit 96 is the expert report of Jennifer Freyd. And I don't know if it's Freyd or Freed. I mean, no disrespect. I just don't know how to pronounce it as I've only ever seen her name in writing. But she was the one that Lively retained to talk about like psychology theory. I believe she was the one who initially coined the Darvo term, which is like something that gets overused to death on the internet these days. Basically, if you like don't agree with someone, you see two people fighting and they are like, well, no, it's your fault, it's your fault. And people these days will just be like, that's Darvo. I'm like, no. There's more complex, involved things that go into that in a relationship. It's not just like disagreeing with each other. So Darvo is something that gets massively overused. But she goes and takes the testimony of the lady who kind of coined the term Darvo. And that's what they're talking about in this section here. Lively submitted the entire report, so the expert report of Jennifer Freed, in opposition to the Wayfarer party's summary judgment motion, but only specifically cites pages 10 and 16 at paragraph 442 of Lively's counter-rule statement. The proposition at paragraph 442 does not relate to Sony Pictures Entertainment. The report nonetheless discusses Sony Picture Entertainment policy and describes in detail purported conduct of an SPE employee taken out of context, all of which is completely irrelevant to the underlying motions, as demonstrated by the fact that this material is not cited by Lively in her opposition papers. Okay. In addition, at page 26 of the exhibit, the expert selectively quotes a sentence of an email from an SPE executive to create an inflammatory impression while omitting the subsequent sentence that changes the quote's meaning. But the underlying email the expert is quoting, which reveals the missing context, is not included in the papers, and the executive that wrote the email was not deposed. There was no reason to include this portion or any other portion of Exhibit 96 in Lively's opposition discussed above, beyond the specific portions on which Lively is relying. Okay. One sec, guys. Okay. Paragraph 572 of Lively's Counter Rule 56.1 statement purports to describe Wayfarer's conduct, but then includes a gratuitous, unnecessary, and antagonistic reference to an SPE employee and purported SPE conduct. Okay. These paragraphs here that they list unnecessarily criticize the same employee in a manner irrelevant to the motion. Exhibit 124 is the expert report of Michael Robbins, Miss Lively's expert on harassment, and Exhibit 17 is a transcript of his deposition. SPE seeks to redact narrowly tailored portions of these two exhibits that unnecessarily criticize the same SPE employee. SPE is not a party to this action and was not responsible for the production of the film. The SPE employee whom the Frey report, Robbins report, and deposition attack, and whom paragraphs, and then they list the paragraphs there, of the counter statement unnecessarily criticize, is a private person, not a party to this lawsuit. SPE's proposed redactions are narrowly tailored to protect the professional and privacy interests of an SPE employee. Permitting these statements to become public via purported expert testimony opining on this employee's supposed obligations, where this material is not relevant to Lively's opposition arguments, simply harasses an innocent third party. Okay. Sorry, I have 2 alarms set every morning for when I need to get started on something. My bad. 1 second. Okay. In sum, the SPE material has no relevance to the judicial function and implicates the substantial privacy interests of non-parties, as well as SPE's private commercial interests that far exceed any possible public interest in access to them. So there's, nothing too crazy in this paragraph here that we need to go over. But yeah, that last section there from that specific exhibit is like, they were saying there's like unnecessary information about an employee. They selectively quote things or selectively, take things out of context in a way that changes the meaning of things. And it only serves to harass a non-party. Obviously, I don't know exactly what they're talking about, exactly who they're talking about. Nobody can really know that for sure. We can kind of try to put the pieces together. But I'm just going to say right now, I really don't know for sure. So, all right. So the last one we'll go over this morning is the WME request. Again, there's a lot of the same language in here as in all the other requests, because that's the standard that the court has asked them to use, or the standard the court would expect them to use. Let's see. Okay. So like this, again, this is another one we saw in a couple of these other requests. Courts have the power to ensure that their records are not used to gratify private spite or promote public scandal, and have refused to permit their files to serve as reservoirs of libelous statements for press consumption. So that's something that a lot of people will use to argue why certain redactions should remain in place. I think I saw that used in at least 3 letters last night, but I didn't read them super carefully as far as like all the standard for why things should be redacted, because like a lot of the arguments were largely the same. One sec. Okay. So I skimmed down a little bit. Here, WME's privacy interests justify the requested redaction of certain private information in internal WME texts. The proposed redactions are narrowly tailored and seal only sensitive information that has, at best, minimal relevance to the court's summary judgment decision. Okay. Notably, there is no evidence that the WME employees participating in the communications have any personal knowledge of what happened during the filming of It Ends With Us, and in fact, they did not. Instead, the basis of WME's knowledge in connection with the proposed redactions was statements and information conveyed by Baldoni and Heath without independent verification or investigation by WME. Thus, WME requests to redact statements that merely advance second or third hand knowledge. So they're basically saying like they were talking to them about what Baldoni and Heath were telling them happened, I guess. That's my interpretation of this, which could be, I could be a little off on this, so you guys let me know what you think. It sounds like they're saying because they were just reacting to what Baldoni and Heath said, they don't want it to look as if they were confirming like that things happened that way, because they didn't like independently investigate those things. It says, moreover, WME employees are agents and advocates for their clients, and the communications reflect advocacy based on information conveyed to such employees by their clients. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, so that in and of itself, I'm like, I don't understand why that requires redaction, especially if it's talking about stuff that happened on the set or the filming. That's going to be something that they can argue if they think that should be publicly released. But they have attached some text messages at the bottom of this one, which I wanted to go over. Hang on. Yeah, we need to read that. Okay. So we have Danny Greenberg in here. And Patrick Whitesell. These texts right here don't really tell you anything because there's redaction there. I don't really know what they were talking about. So it sounds like maybe they were discussing amongst each other what was relayed to them. Okay. Let me go down here to... Yeah, again, so it looks like they're just discussing amongst themselves like what happened there. He's saying, great job navigating, blah, blah, blah. All right. Okay. So this is between Justin and Danny. Danny says, just checking in to see how the week went. Here to talk if you need me for anything. And this is December 2023. All right. Justin says, hey man, I had a really bad week. She had the audacity to email me directly and invite me to a meeting at her house alone if I chose. Again, weird choice with the accusation she's making against him. She's refused a body double, which now Sony and Todd have to jump in to make sure that happens, because that's just setting me up for a trap, although she's making me have one. So she wanted him to have a body double for some of these scenes. And she's like, no, I refuse to have one. And he's like, well, that's setting me up for a trap. She's rejected all my storyboards for the sex scenes, so he has to get involved. He being, I guess, Todd. because she's trying to keep all of both of our clothes on for the big love scene, which is just ridiculous if you know the book. And Sony, had talked to them ahead of time and said they wanted more like intimate scenes to be more in line with the book, which I haven't read, but I have heard was pretty. There was a lot of stuff in there. Okay. Justin says, this whole thing is a gigantic clusterfuck, and yet I'm doing my best to stay positive, although it's been very draining on me and time-consuming over this break to be dealing with an actress who is rewriting the writer and director. I've gone through the whole script, and I'm giving her 95% of what she wants for peace, but this is just a brutal experience. And then they try to redact Danny's response to that. Justin says, we are all going to her house on Thursday, as that's where she has said the meeting needs to take place. She also doesn't want Jamie on set, which we are fighting back on. Danny says, good, you should. There has to be a line. I'll talk with Todd about that, and Warren too, if I need to. Okay. Justin says, not right now, but feel free to check in with Todd next week. I'm doing my best to just stay positive and give her as many wins as possible to just finish this thing, but it's going to be tough at some point. Warren needs to know that she's destroying her reputation. So before any of this happens, you can see how frustrating it was for him to try to give Sony what they wanted from the intimate scenes, and she's like making it very difficult, refusing a body double, but making him have one, trying to keep all of both of their clothes on for a sex scene. Which was obviously outlined very, very differently in the book that they're basing this film on. Let's see. He's trying to give her what she wants. She's making it difficult. All right, let's see. And then before anything even blew up, anything like that, he's saying here to Danny, like, she's destroying her reputation. So... Justin says, where we will need the most help is during the edit, because I'm not going to get everything she wants, and I foresee that being a big issue. I won't even have time to barely show anybody the movie before I test it. That's what happens when you push the shoot to January. Okay. And that's really it. All right. People were laughing about her keeping her fishnets on, were they? I just kind of forgot about that. I think my brain willfully let it go. Let me see what's going on here before I sign off for the morning. Oh, I'll send you over to my friend Nick. He's looking at something. It says, will the no-show defendant show up today? He does like court watches and stuff. So tell him Lauren sent you and said hi if you go over there. It'll redirect you when we're done with this stream. I got to get to work. So that might be it for me today, depending on what else comes up. But yeah, I might take the rest of the day off. We'll see. All right, guys. Appreciate it. Don't forget to hit the like button for me. It helps me out. And I will see you all soon. Bye.